Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today we continue our series, American Film Comedy, from slapstick to screwball. And in fact, we've got a film from 1936, The Milky Way, directed by Leo McCarey and starring Harold Lloyd, that's a kind of crossroads between slapstick and screwball. It's got strong elements of both, and we'll be talking about that and a number of other aspects of this barrel of fun after today's screening. It's a pleasure to welcome to City Cinematheque Professor Rob King of Columbia University, a noted expert on the relationship between American film comedy and our society, the USA. So now, take this trip into the comic world of Harold Lloyd with The Milky Way. Welcome back to City Cinematheque. I hope you've enjoyed this opportunity to see The Milky Way, a film starring Harold Lloyd, but that may not be really a Harold Lloyd film in a number of ways. We'll be able to talk about that and a number of other things. For example, the etiquette of bringing a lion along with you when you stop by for a hotel or something like that. In the next 30 minutes. And it's a real pleasure to welcome to City Cinematheque Professor Rob King from Columbia University. Some of our viewers may know him by his writings. He has written 2 books on American film comedy, most recently Hokum, which is about the early sound film shorts and their relationship with mass society. He's done a lot of thinking about slapstick, people like Harold Lloyd and many others, including director Leo McCarey. So welcome to City Cinematheque, Rob.
Thank you.
Great. So let's just start with Harold Lloyd himself. Mm-hmm. Harold Lloyd, most people know of as one of the great silent, what we were called silent clowns of this. But we're now in 1936 and sound film. So let's step back just a little bit and talk to me about what's a Harold Lloyd film that you would think of maybe in the 1920s.
Well, I mean, I think The Freshman, Speedy, Girl Shy. Sorry, that's 3 titles instead of 1. That's okay. But I mean, those are many of the major pictures, I think, by which Lloyd is known and his talent kind of measured today. Okay,
and so he's associated with, with some of the special qualities of silent film comedy, and most frequently thrill comedy. So what are the kind of signatures of who Harold Lloyd was as a filmmaker?
Well, I mean, I think that you're right to point to thrill comedy. That was definitely one of his hallmarks. Most famously, of course, in Safety Last, the film in which he has to climb an extremely tall building at the end. Although he had also climbed skyscrapers in a number of his earlier shorts, Hal Road Studios, like Never Weaken, for example, and so on and so forth. But thrill comedy, where we're kind of, I guess, laughing nervously, as opposed to, is very much one of Lloyd's hallmarks. Another thing that distinguishes him is the move away that one sees in Lloyd from that earlier style of burlesque style performance, where we're doing very exaggerated gestures, exaggerated costuming, bizarre and enormous moustaches, that sort of thing. That Lloyd is putting all of that to one side and kind of appearing natural, as it were, without elaborate facial hair, just with a pair of glasses. And in that way, he's really kind of setting the groundwork for what would become a template for a more, let's say, romantic comedy actor style. But also setting the pathway towards people like Danny Kaye, for example, who's perhaps the most obvious inheritor of Lloyd's mantle as we move beyond Lloyd's own career into the 40s and 50s.
Right. And it's worth mentioning that the film we just saw, The Milky Way, is eventually, the rights to it are eventually bought by Samuel Goldwyn as a vehicle for Danny Kaye. Danny Kaye, the kid from Brooklyn, right?
Kid from Brooklyn, that's exactly right. Yes, so I mean, that's perhaps the most obvious way in which Danny Kaye is fitting into Harold Lloyd's shoes there.
Right. And so what from your point of view are some of the characteristics of this Harold Lloyd protagonist, aside from the fact that he pulls back from the burlesque?
Right. Well, he's young.
Okay.
He is typically involved in romance in a way that is at least more plausible than in the case of some of the other slapstick protagonists, where romance with someone with a a walrus-style moustache is not so likely. And he's a man on the make. He's very much a kind of paradigm of the white-collar worker in the 1920s. He's moving from small town to the big city. Like, that's a typical plot of his in Safety Last, in Speedy as well. And he's trying to make good in the city. So that's the typical Lloyd plot. Him working as a milkman, not quite as typical, I think.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting. So I think it's interesting to plot the fact that not only have we moved from silent to sound, but we've moved also from the production mode that he actually had in the 20s, because as I understand it, Lloyd was successful enough in the manner of Keaton and Chaplin, the other two greats that we are most commonly think of, that he owned his own production in the 1920s for a number of his most important films. So there's this whole issue of he's creating his persona and his narrative patterns under his control, right?
Right. Yes. I mean, I think that's exactly right. And the analogy with Chaplin and Keaton in that respect as two other comedians who kind of maintained an independence is
right.
Precisely right. One of the key distinctions, though, is that Lloyd was never really that involved in terms of the directing of his films. It was always other directors, which is not to say that he didn't step in. It's been argued that he did, for example, in Movie Crazy, because Clyde Brookman, the director of that film, was having trouble with drinking by that point in his career. But he's not. He doesn't direct himself in the same way as many of the other comedians, leading comedians did.
So let's get him and American film comedy from the fact that he's controlling his own persona, his own stories, and his own production company in the 20s. That's the 20s. We're now in 1936. The sound revolution, has come. So, where does he fit in this?
Right. Well, when we find him in Milky Way, to be honest, he's on the downslide of his career. In fact, I would qualify that and say he's in the rapidly accelerating portion of the downslide of his career. The transition to sound was one that all of the silent comedians had to weather in their own ways. Right. And I don't think you can generalize any pattern that simply applies across the board. And certainly the old argument that sound came along and that was it for slapstick is, I think, that as though there was like that this was the line that could not be crossed. That's not really something that holds up to serious scrutiny. In terms of Lloyd specifically, his first sound film was Welcome Danger. That was a film that he had made as a silent film, but then with the sound revolution, he kind of realizes that we're going to miss the boat here. Okay. So they bring it back for reshoots to release it as as a talking film. After that, he makes Feet First, which is an attempt to kind of capture former glories. This is equivalent to Safety Last. He's climbing a tall building and so on and so forth. So he's doing his old shtick. But I've read that it didn't play as well with sound. The reason being that with sound, you have a man hanging on the edge of a building screaming for help. you could hear him screaming for help, and that's not as funny as you have in Safety Last. Now, those two films were profitable though. Welcome Danger was very profitable.
Okay.
It made about $3 million gross out of a $1 million budget. But then after Feet First, he makes movie Crazy, which he thought was the best film that he had made in sound.
Right.
And arguably, I would suggest that he wasn't wrong.
Okay.
That it strikes the balance between slapstick and sound quite nicely, where we're moving between, there are sounds, dialogue sequences, but then there are more kind of wordless sequences of pantomime and slapstick, and it's a nice balance. But the film, it was not as successful as Lloyd believed it would be. It basically broke even, which is a major downturn for Lloyd. And
if I can just interject,
sure.
his films in the 1920s were enormously successful with publics.
Oh, yeah.
And enormously successful globally, financially. So he was a man of considerable means, and I mean that, who always controlled those means, et cetera. So this is a disappointment to anybody if you only break even, but for somebody who's had the level of success that he's had,
Well, Feet First, for example, I mentioned that film was profitable, but still, quote unquote, only to the tune of like $1.5 million gross. Right, which is that's a major drop from Welcome Danger. Right, and then it drops again for movie Crazy. Lloyd blamed Paramount for the failure. He felt that it was mishandled in distribution. Although he had his own production company, the Harold Lloyd Corporation, it was Paramount that released his films. And so for his next film after movie Crazy, he leaves Paramount, really for the first time, and makes the film The Cat's Paw, which is released by Fox. And that is a very, very unusual film, and it's also very dialogue heavy. That's a film that also, it's not profitable. It's kind of just breaking even. Lloyd's films at this point in time, they had like a $600,000 budget, maybe up to $700,000, something like that. And that's about as much as his films are making at this point in time. And then we get to the Milky Way. And the Milky Way, he's returned to Paramount, but not through his own production company. Right? Because I think he's realized at this point, I don't really want to put up my own money to make these films, because they're not making as much money as they used to. So rather uniquely at this point, he is being hired by Paramount as a salaried actor. I think his salary was something like $125,000 at this point. Not that Harold Lloyd Corporation was entirely out of the picture. The agreement that he struck with Paramount is that his corporation would receive 50% of the profits of the film. And it also had the stipulation that he would work with director Leo McCarey for this film. So that was in the contract for the Milky Way. But the Milky Way, like at a time when, as I mentioned, his budgets were $600,000 or so on and so forth, that film ran way over. That film cost around $1 million. And that's because, I'm not sure exactly why, but it was a shoot that was plagued with illness. Leo McCarey, Véronique Teasdale, Adolphe Menjou, they all were ill during production. I don't know whether it was the same thing they were ill with, but who knows, or what was happening behind the scenes there. But that added to the cost of the film. And it ultimately represented a $250,000 loss for Paramount.
Ooh.
So yeah, that's a significant setback for Lloyd. Effectively, he makes one more picture, Professor Beware, that's in '38. He's then more or less in retirement until he gets brought back by Preston Sturges for The Sins of Harold Dibbledock. So this is really pretty much at the moment where Lloyd has to be realizing that this isn't happening anymore.
At the same time, imperfect though the film may be in so many ways, I think it's a fascinating object because of the fact that there are a number of elements here that they're trying to combine in a number of ways, but the combination may be imperfect, as it were. And I'm thinking about the fact that there is a lot of physical comedy,
Right.
you know, in the film. There is sound comedy that is generated by sound in some way.
Right.
And at the same time, you've got the vernacular, fast-talking
Right.
clip, dialogue. So let's talk a little bit about how those elements work. So what, as it were, what residue of the physical comedy of Lloyd is in this film? How's he trying to use it from your point of view?
Well, that's an interesting question because there's a very direct residue that we can detect in the Milky Way from his earlier silent comedies.
Okay.
And in particular, I'm thinking of The Freshman, which is perhaps his most widely known film outside of Safety Last at this point. You might recall that in The Freshman, he has this little scissor leg jig that he performs. When he introduces himself to his hopeful friends at college. And that then gets replicated in the Milky Way, where it gets incorporated into this ducking maneuver that is so central to the plot. It's the little scissor leg dance from The Freshman combined with that. You know, that's basically it, right? But that's directly from his days in silent comedy. And I think it's very interesting to compare that little dance from The Freshman with what we get in the Milky Way, because it tells us something about one of the difficulties that silent comedians were facing during the transition. During the silent era, films would typically be played back, projected a little bit faster than they would have been filmed.
Cranked,
Right. So we're talking cranking of about, let's say, anything from 14 to 20 frames per second, and a playback of like anything from 22 to 28, depending on the effect that the projector, or how quickly the projector wanted to get through the film. That variability of time doesn't exist in sound, right? Because you have to have the same playback rate as filming rate, 24 frames per second, so the voices don't sound squeaky, things like that. And this has an impact on how physical comedy actually registers. If you look at The Freshman and his little dance, where it's being projected a little bit faster than it would have been recorded, it seems as though he's dancing like lighter than air. Like if you tried to do that dance yourself at the speed at which he does it in The Freshman, you'd fall over. Like it can't be done, right? Whereas when you see it in the Milky Way, that's happening in real time. It's not sped up in any way, so we're not getting that general buoyancy of movement, that general kind of sense of almost a freedom from the constraints of gravity almost that we get in the silent comedies. And it feels different. If in the Freshman the dance is hilarious, if it's funny, I think in the Milky Way it's cute.
Right.
It's not going to bust a gut though, because it has a different resonance in terms of what you're seeing on the screen there. So that's, I think, perhaps the most obvious residue the most direct residue of Lloyd's silent film comedy that we see in the Milky Way. But we also see why it's not quite working as well. Right.
And then also the script is set up in a particular way so that there's some deviation from the Lloyd character in the Lloyd films earlier, as well as the fact that it's not set up. They're not really trying to reinvent thrill comedy here.
Right. Yeah, I think that with the disappointment of Feet First, that you don't really see Lloyd trying to do thrill comedy again in the sound era, which is a notable departure. And I think it's also worth mentioning that the film is based on a stage play.
Okay, good point.
And as was true of many comedies during this, during the period in the early sound era, you get the Hollywood studios are basically doing a land rush on Broadway properties, which is why we're getting the Marx Brothers, why we're getting Eddie Cantor, and so on and so forth. And this is true of the Milky Way as well, which I think helps explain why it's a somewhat more dialogue-heavy film than is typical of Lloyd. It helps explain also why it has much more of an ensemble cast feel to it than other of Lloyd's films from the sound era, where it's not just Lloyd, but it's, as I mentioned, it's very Teasdale, it's Adolphe Menjou, it's Lionel Stander. And that they're pushing, if you think about their dialogue, it seems that they're doing the fast-talking style that would be such a hallmark of screwball comedy, right? Particularly Lionel Stander and the dialogue with very Teasdale as well.
Well, if I may point out, of course, Adolphe Menjou has been in the early 30s in the first version of the Front Page, which is, the newspaper comedy of fast-paced dialogue. And while, Howard Hawks' very great His Girl Friday is better remembered now, when one looks back, you see that the Adolphe Menjou character in the Milky Way, a certain kind of urban, fast-talking trickster, is absolutely something that comes out, what you're talking about, comes out of a particular Broadway tradition of a kind of play that's based in vernacular American English, as opposed to the higher class kind of Noel Coward manner of are they in Boston or are they in London? I can't quite tell, because everybody is sophisticated in the same kind of way, and it's when the British and American actors, they kind of blend together. Whereas here, one of the things of the Milky Way is it fits in this tradition, if imperfectly, of you're unquestionably in an American city with this American assemblage of characters.
Right, that's a very good point. And I think it's also worth noting how sound here really allowed Menjou in particular to move into different kinds of roles. Because I think when we think of Menjou's career in the late silent era in the 1920s, he is the kind of Noel Coward, type, in whether it's Chaplin's The Woman of Paris or in Lubitsch films and so on and so forth, because that's what he looks like, right?
Oh, good point.
Sounds, he can sound different.
Absolutely.
So now we get him sounding like a little bit of a heel, like a kind of criminal adjacent, I think in the Milky Way, which is an interesting, different kind of character type that sound really allowed him to try out.
Well, this is also a film, as you pointed out, the contract said Leo McCarey must direct it. So why is Harold Lloyd asking for Leo McCarey? Let's do a little bit about the trajectory of Carey, who has a trajectory different in terms of success from silent to sound.
Well, yeah, that's a great question. Why McCarey? Well, in part, one way to answer that question would be to say, why not Clyde Brookman, right? Because Clyde Brookman had been involved as director of a number of Lloyd's early sound features. Clyde Brookman was degenerating at that point. He had a major drinking problem and was basically just retreating into short subjects for Columbia Pictures, the Three Stooges, that kind of thing at this point. Why McCarey? I mean, I think it's a marriage on paper. It's a marriage made in heaven. McCarey is someone who had got his start directing at the Hal Roach Studios. And by the end of the 1920s, he in fact was vice president in charge of production at the Hal Roach Studios. He had directed a number of terrific short subjects with Charlie Chase, who was perhaps Harold Lloyd's most obvious inheritor at the Hal Roach Studios. And then I think that there's probably no director who is more successful in the early sound era as trying out the new types of comedy that sound allows for. I mean, he shows that he can do the Marx Brothers style of anarchistic comedy by making Duck Soup, which is arguably their best film.
Absolutely.
He then, later will make The Awful Truth, which is, again, I mean, it's one of the platonic ideals of screwball comedy, that film. Like, he was a very, adaptable filmmaker.
Right.
And you could make the case that, he's one of the greatest of American comedy filmmakers in terms of his ability to move within these different modes. So again, on paper, it looks like Harold Lloyd plus Leo McCarey. It was Harold Lloyd gets his start at Hal Roach. Leo McCarey had never actually directed him though, because his time at Roach starts after Lloyd's. It's in a sense it's a missed opportunity that's finally being fulfilled. But it's, I mean, one could argue that it's not quite as successful as one would hope.
Well, there are different kinds of energies that we associate with screwball and with slapstick. I mean, they're both enormously energetic comic styles.
Right.
You know, I mean, and they're synchronized with modernity in some way, but synchronized, in different ways. And it's as if these two energies can't really find that bridge between each other.
No, that's a very interesting point. I mean, I think that one thing that we need to bear in mind there is that tastes in comedy were changing during this period. That even if you look at the late silent era, let's take some of the key films made by some of the great comedians of that time: Chaplin, The Circus, Buster Keaton, The General, Harold Lloyd, The Kid Brother. Those are all films from around 1927, 1928. So they're before sound. They're all not quite as successful as the filmmakers would want. And that's with sound, it's not even in the equation there.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So that, I think, implies something else is happening there. And I would suggest that tastes were changing, that there was an emerging vogue for what at the time was called the cuckoo style of humor, which basically referred to a kind of frenetic style of nonsense-oriented humor that lended itself to verbal comedy. Right. You're seeing that in the Marx Brothers. You're seeing that in Robert Benchley. You're seeing that in a large number of comedians, whether comedic performers or writers, who are beginning to become more prominent. And you see it in the fast-paced verbal style of screwball as well. But you're not really seeing that in Harold Lloyd. I mean, he can participate in physical comedy as well as anybody, but you're not seeing him participate in verbal comedy really on the same level that we're finding a Lionel Stander or Adolphe Menjou, people like that.
Okay. This is the place where we have to pause, because we've come to, it's actually a summary moment, I think, in our discussion, but we've also run out of time. So it's a double whammy, as we say. I hope you've enjoyed our screening today and our discussion. If you'd like to know more about City Cinematheque or about City University Television, CUNY TV, it's no surprise that you can visit our website, www.tv.cuny.edu. There you'll find our full schedule. You'll find ways to look at episodes from the past, both of this series and others, and you'll find ways to communicate with us. So please visit www.tv.cuny.edu. Rob, thanks for bringing just a wealth of knowledge and background about this, rich if imperfect film, but a lot of fun. Both the film and also having a opportunity to chat with you. Hope to see you back on City Cinematheque sometime.
Likewise, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Great. And I want to thank you for being with us for today and encourage you to join us again as we continue our stroll through the archives of film history here on City Cinematheque. For now, it's goodbye.